back. Well, yes, indeed, still talking about those matters, grazing-related matters. Yeah, that's where we find ourselves these days. We've got Mr. Ahmed Raji, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, who joins us from our studios in Abuja. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the program, sir.
Thank you, and good morning. Thank you.
Okay, now this, I mean, I don't know how long and when there will not be any reactions about this kind of matters or about most matters these days, as it turns out. Only recently, the president did approve recommendation of the committee to review with dispatch the 368 grazing routes across grazing sites across 25 states. And of course, there's been a lot of reactions about some of these things. So from your perspective, I mean, when this, was out there, legally speaking, what were your thoughts when you heard it? Because, I mean, there has to be legal position on this matter.
Well, thank you very much. Grazing is part of agriculture. And when it comes to agriculture, we are talking about land. And in Nigeria today, the basic law governing the administration of land is Land Use Act. Of course, subject to or not subject to, it also accommodates the land tenure laws in northern region as well as state land law in southern region to the extent that they are consistent with the Land Use Act. But the basic main law, the ground norm when it comes to land matters is Land Use Act. And it overrides any other law. In fact, Land Use Act is a special enactment way above other statutes. Why do I say this? It is one of the few statutes found in the Constitution directly, which makes it special, and you cannot amend it except the way and manner provided by the Constitution, unlike other ordinary statutes. I think there are other statutes that enjoy this treatment, NYC Act, and I think Public Complaint Commission, something of that nature. I have searched through the Land Use Act. Grazing was referred to in Section 6. I cannot find anywhere where there's anything like grazing routes. Perhaps in the whole northern region, the local laws made provisions for grazing routes, maybe. But when you are talking of the whole country under the Land Use Act, there is nowhere the Act accommodates anything like grazing routes. In fact, the management of land is in the hands of the governor of each state, and to a limited extent in the hands of the local government chairman or local government authority. And there is no role for the federal government as far as the Land Use Act and management of land is concerned in Nigeria. Of course, when the federal government needs lands in the state, it will inform, or for a public purpose, must be, it will inform the state government. The state government will now, for overriding public interest, acquire that land. That will not entail routes or grazing routes. So that's my own humble understanding of what grazing route is vis-a-vis the current land regime in Nigeria.
So does that then suggest that these committee recommendations is tantamount to putting something or nothing with regards, particularly in context of the Land Use Act?
Well, I won't put it that far. I will only advise them to go and study the Land Use Act properly and see whatever they are doing, whether it's cognizable, whether it has basis, whether there is any legal basis for it. Because you are talking of routes that will cross across several states. Does the federal government have the virus to administer lands across the 36 states of the Federation? apart from FCT Abuja and where they have federal establishments in parts of the country? I doubt it. Because when you look at the Land Use Act, it vests the land in the governor, especially when it comes to right of occupancy, statutory. And when it comes to customary right of occupancy, that is vested in the local government authority, of course, subject to the overriding power of the governor. But the governor holds the land in trustee for the people. And when it comes to making regulations, no mention was made of the federal government. The nearest thing to it is the reference to the Council of States and not the federal government. I would recommend to the committee that they should go and examine Land Use Act properly before venturing into what may come out to be something that will promote or lead to acrimony and crisis. I mean,
but what about those who say the school of thought that believes that they hinge this on part of the terms of reference of this committee, which is to collate and determine status of grazing reserves. So they argue that, look, they're not planning to take fresh land. That if there were grazing routes, or they assume that there are grazing routes, they want to determine the level of encroachment on those already existing grazing routes with a view to finding out, okay, look, who has encroached on this which already existed. Is that tenable?
If there's an encroachment, I think, who are the owners of the grazing reserves? Is it not state government? The state government should be the one to complain and not the federal government. Who owns the grazing reserve? Who owns it? Is it a state government or a federal government? If a grazing reserve belongs to the a state government and it is run by it, whatever route leads to that grazing reserve is the business of the state government. And what kind of routes are they talking about? Are there no roads created by the government, maintained by the government?
Okay.
And is grazing the only occupation? Agriculture is just one. Agriculture is the main occupation. Grazing is under it. What about those into cassava? What are their roots? Or fishery? Which roots do they have in the water? Or in the sea?
Okay, well, quite a number of issues to raise,
So I believe,
really. So looking at that press release, pardon me, you can add that to the question. So looking at the press release that says that the president has approved the review of grazing reserves in 25 states, and they say it numbers 368 grazing sites across those states. So some people have tried to weigh this. I mean, looking at it, this is a State House press release. This is a release from essentially the presidency, not a random release. So they assume that things will have been thought through quite well, especially when you look at the committee and the makeup of that committee. So they thought, okay, assuming but not conceding that, this is based on that grazing reserve law of 64-65, which essentially, as you mentioned, was for the northern part of the country, was from a northern parliament at that time. So what happened to those grazing reserves in respect of that law? What is the fate of those reserves today?
well, so long as those laws or state law or the law of northern region is still in the status books, interested states can still resuscitate the grazing reserves. And any southern state, because why do we have reserve? It's for fuel security. And if the southern states, they believe they don't have a threat to food security, or they have silos, or they have whatever, there is no problem. But the grazing they are talking about now is about cattle. And they want to trace the routes for the movement of the cattle. The question is, does the federal government have the right under the Land Use Act to restore or reopen any grazing route, because this will mean a certain ownership over portions of land, which land has been vested in the governor of each state, in trust for the people. So, my humble understanding is a careful reading of the Land Use Act is not against grazing reserve. No. It's the routes they are talking about that is a challenge. And I want the committee to look carefully into the issue before it snowballs into a real legal gymnastics.
Okay, in fact, it's good you mentioned that committee, because looking at the makeup of the committee, the members include the governor of Kebbi State, who is vice chairman, National Food Security Council, Abubakar Bagudu, the governor of Ebonyi State and chairman of next subcommittee on NLTP, which has been another issue of debate. That's Governor Umahi. We also have the Minister of Water Resources, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. We have Minister of Environment. There's a technical subcommittee as well, which has representatives from the Ministry of Justice. So, I mean, to look at the legal perspective, I believe the Surveyor General of the Federation, National Agricultural Land Development Authority, National Space Research Development Agency. So how will they miss this, really? Is it possible that they missed this important point that you have raised?
Well, these are eminent Nigerians you have mentioned. I have a lot of regard for all of them, especially His Excellency the Governor of Kebbi State, Atiku Bagudu. I have a lot of respect for him. But you know, when you are looking at things and then reports are being generated, let's wait until they finish the entire exercise. But it's good we are granting this interview. They should go and get copies of the Land Use Act, study it carefully, and be well guided. Because I do not think grazing routes has a place, a national grazing routes has a place under the Land Use Act. So I have a lot of respect for all those individuals you have mentioned. They are eminent Nigerians. There's no doubt about that. But
so it is very possible that in the deliberations, they perhaps missed some of these germane points you raised, and therefore they should go back and look at it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because, you know, they are mortals who are liable to errors and what have you. But I know that at the end of the day, they will come to something very acceptable and in line with the law. Because no matter how powerful, no matter how big, no matter the committee, this committee is not even statutory. It's just an ad hoc thing, just to assist the federal government. And even if it's statutory, it cannot operate above the law. It must operate within the law. It must recommend within the law. Nobody is above the law.
Okay, again, I go back to that law of 1964-65, and some have said that it actually creates 415, I recall a government official saying that, well, there were 415 grazing reserves, or routes, whatever the term is, in that particular law. But this release from the State House says that there are 368 across 25 states. So if that law at that time was for northern Nigeria, some say there are 19 states in northern Nigeria, how then is it possible to have these reserves across 25 states? Does that raise questions for you as well? Well,
it all depends on, until we see the law and we see nobody has seen any document up to now. We have been told that they're going to come out with a gazette wherein these routes have been identified. Until we see that, then we'll be able to comment. All this figure of 25 states, 30 states, until we see the documents, then one will be able to comment. Because, you know, the northern region then is has about 19 states today in the country. Perhaps maybe additional 6 states more, the route extended. But how can a northern region law create roots in either western region or eastern region or midwestern region? That is part of the riddles we have to wait for until we see the document.
Do we have a document?
The northern region parliament only had the virus to legislate within northern region and not to legislate and create, assuming such roots existed, to create grazing roots outside his region, his area of legislative competence. That's another debate entirely. But let's see the document. When we see it, subject it to public debate, and let's see what it takes. But my point is, let us go back to Land Use Act. Because whatever grazing reserve law, or grazing roots law, state land law, land tenure law, Land Use Act overrides all of them. Because it states under section 6 or so of the 4 of the Land Use Act that any state land law, any state land tenure law must have to align with the provisions of the Land Use Act. So Land Use Act is the constitution as far as land matter is concerned in Nigeria. All the state legislation, they are like subsidiary instruments, which must align with the Land Use Act.
Speaking about documents, I just want to get this clear. Are you saying that this release, which was signed by Mr. Garba Shehu, the Senior Special Assistant to the President, is not enough to go by? I mean, it contains the figures I told you about, the number of grazing reserves in 25 states, 368 of them. So that's a document of some sort. Are you saying it's not much to go by in the whole conversation around grazing reserves, what the law says?
Well, you're talking of a very important matter touching on land. With the greatest respect to Alhaji Garba Shehu, whatever statement he makes cannot represent the law. I mean, what I mean is this. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's not the law. We have to see the law. We have to see the instrument. Because a press secretary has made a statement, that does not mean it's the law. It can be mistaken. It may not be well advised. It may not be well guided. So, let's see the instrument. What is he referring to? What is he speaking from? Is he speaking from institutional memory, or is he speaking from some instruments that are yet to be released to the public? Let's see them. It cannot, because a press secretary has come out to say A, B, C, D, therefore, that's all. No, that cannot be. Not even the president of the country, if he speaks and it's not in tandem with the law, it cannot be right. Or a governor, it cannot be. Not even the United States of America, president. When President Trump rolled out some policies on banning people or preventing some people from coming in or going out and what have you, by way of speech or an executive order, it was set aside. So how much less a press secretary making a statement? What about it?
But you know, Mr. Raji, part of members of the technical committee, they were also drawn from Ministry of Justice, Surveyor General's office, and then they also recommended production, that's the committee now, recommended production of maps, geo-mapping, tagging of sites, analysis of findings and report presentation, as well as design appropriate communication on grazing reserves and operations. While we wait to see this document, but I'm trying to understand the intentment, the intention, or the thinking of this committee, because, you know, several people have talked about cattle colony, ranching, national livestock transformation plan, different nomenclature, description about some of these things. What do you really think is going on here just taking a look at the big picture and perhaps what has happened before, and then looking at this current situation?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. But what I think, why is all this debate? I believe it is because of the herders-farmers clash and all this encroachment on land and conflict, and then not so much of herders, the harmless ones or what have you, but those who have now come disguising as herders, but they are real criminals, killing, maiming, and doing all sorts of things, in which they have said these are foreigners. This is what has brought about all this. So what is playing out is, look, yes, everybody wants food security, is a very desirable program. Everybody wants to be guaranteed that there's going to be food. Otherwise, if there's famine, there can be a problem. But with what is going on in several parts of the country, and the unfortunate thing is, even the clash between the farmers and herders is more pronounced in the north. Unfortunately, most Southerners don't know this. The amount of killing going on in some parts of the north is unbelievable. Raping, killing, maiming, these hardened herders, harmed, doing all sorts of things. An emir cried out in Taraba State the other time, and he threatened that he's going to take some steps against them. I mean, based on what they were going through. The same thing, I think a very strict warning was issued in Kano State, that no farmer or no village head should part with land to these foreign herders. So I think it's all an attempt to address this, and why people are apprehensive, if I may guess, is because why creating routes for at this time when these harmed herders have become a terror on people? Why now creating routes for them? I think this is what everything boils down to. And you can see that from the cry of the governor of Benue State, who I think has been much more, it's more on the receiving end, according to report. And if you listen to the views of the highly respected senior lawyer, Mr. Femi Falana, you will see all SAN, you will see all these coming out from there. So I believe the government should look at the problems on ground and devise means of resolving the problems rather than looking into routes which may fuel further suspicion and create a bad impression as if somebody is trying to protect the armed others.
Okay, so this conversation perhaps is quite never ending, but so there's the consideration of states that have signed the anti-open grazing bill into law. We saw Rivers State recently signing, even though Ondo State governor says it will stay. And from what it looks like, I mean, it appears as though this is something the federal government might follow through with. I mean, the president hinted at it during that interview, saying he has told the attorney general to, go and dig them up, and then followed by this months after. So hopefully, I mean, we don't know what will happen in the coming months. What kind of impasse do you see playing out now that states have that anti-open grazing law? I mean, if the federal government says we're going ahead with this, what do you see playing out?
Well, it's not just the southern states. Northern states, the governors met and they say no to open grazing. Like I just said a while ago, the killing is more in the north. It's more. But unfortunately, it is not being given attention. The north has suffered more in the hands of the herders, going to villages, killing people, and all sorts of things happening there. So if all the states, all the governors are saying we don't want open grazing, I don't know where federal government is going to apply its own policy. Whether there is another hemisphere, I don't know. All the governors, they are saying no to open grazing. And when it comes to a policy like grazing and what have you, I think the state has more in control, because the land is more under the control of the state. If we put it on a percentage, all the states put together, they control 90% of the land in Nigeria, maybe less than 10% to the federal government. So where will the federal government apply its open grazing policy? Where? And in whose interest? To serve what purpose? I think there should be a rethink on this in the interest of everybody. The federal government should concentrate on the good work they are doing and not spoil it with this open grazing palaver.
So most of the conversation we've had has centered around the legality or otherwise of this, and you have cited the Land Use Act, the ground norm. You have referenced that old law, the Grazing Reserve Law of 64-65 as well. So essentially, this perhaps rises and falls on laws. Do you see a solution to this? Because clearly there's a challenge. You've referenced the farmer-herders clashes, and you say that perhaps this is in line with trying to find a solution to that. So do you see a solution to this in the law? I mean, maybe we're overlooking it, or at least the committee has overlooked it, such that we can look to the law and say, well, the law says this is what we should do, so let's apply it and sort this.
I believe the committee should look into the Land Use Act carefully and very meticulously. They will find a lot of solutions to whatever they are looking for. And without aligning their recommendations with the Land Use Act, it will only boomerang into a big lawsuit, which we don't need. We don't need it.
Okay, but what do you think about this?
The federal government is doing well in railways. Let them concentrate on railway.
Okay.
To be transporting goods and human beings.
Okay, could you talk to us about
in a progressive system?
Go ahead,
cattle please. That the cattle, those who want to eat cattle, I think one of the leaders then said that, look, if I am in government, if I win, nobody will be slaughtering cow in the north, in the south. The whole slaughtering will be done in the north, and then it will be shipped to the south within just hours, fresh. And then it will be distributed to the several places and whatever. Of course, challenges for the cattle rearers, I mean, what do? They can be accommodated in the ranches. So that's my take on that, and I believe the federal government can do better on this than
talk to us about this. Your impression about this Article 3 of the ECOWAS protocol concerning free movement of cattle and other livestock, and they say with a special permit. Lots of people have referenced it. What do you think about it?
Well, it is not free, completely free. They have to test those animals. They have to test them, because if they have diseases and what have you, it's subject to conditions. You can't just bring in cattle from anywhere and then say that, we have free movement. No. I think Mr. Falana spoke extensively on this, and he referenced all the various articles of the protocol. And you will see that there's a limit. It's not unconditional. Because you are coming from a ECOWAS country, so you can. No, that's not true. They have to test them. They have to ensure that there are no diseases, so that you can. It's not a completely free movement, unchecked and unconditional free movement. No, that is not so.
So, what if? Because you've talked a lot about the Land Use Act being superior to several other provisions. What if that Land Use Act is amended?
What if it's amended?
Yes.
What? Why not? I'm talking of the law as it is today. But the good thing about Land Use Act is like a provision of the Constitution. The way and manner to amend it is very cumbersome. The procedure is cumbersome. And there must have to be a consensus. And you have to justify it. So we wait until it is amended. I'll reserve my comments.
So I think a lot of people
because
agree.
I don't want to...
Please, you can land on that. You don't want to...
Speaking on supposition, on heave. We're talking about what is on ground now. Not supposition. What if it is not amended?
Well, still talking about what's on ground now. So I think a lot of people agree that the herders need to find a place where they can essentially do their business. And that's what a lot of people call it. It's a business. So ranching, people have said, is a way forward. But I think the challenge now is how to go about it. So you have the federal government talking about certain grazing reserves across states, some saying, well, that's not how you should go about it. There's a Land Use Act. So practically speaking now, if anyone wants to do the business of rearing cattle, livestock business, and then we agree that ranching is the way to go, what is the process to follow according to law?
Where you look at, where do you want to site your ranch? Look at if there is an applicable law governing it. If there's no applicable law, you hide under general business. Because under the Land Use Act, Section 6 allows the local government to grant a customary right of occupancy for grazing. For agriculture, about 500 hectares, and for grazing, for about 5,000 hectares. And if it is more, you need to get the consent of the governor. So you can hide under that. And grazing, ranching, they all mean the same thing. If within the grazing zone that you are given, you do your ranching there. And there is no state or no part of the country in the past without some form of ranches or the other. I know one in my own place is called Fashola, and they used to have all sorts of animals there and whatever. And those who want to go, they will go there and buy and then do and use it for whatever they want to use it. So, back to your question, it has no problem there. The Land Use Act already carries with it the permission to do grazing. And within the grazing zone you are allocated or allotted, you can ranch. Ranching means you don't allow the cattle to be moving about anyhow. You put them in one place, they'll be able to move around, and that is why the law says for ordinary agriculture, crops and what have you, an average applicant is entitled to 500 hectares. But for ranching, for grazing for animals and what have you, you are entitled to 5,000 hectares. And if it is going to be more, you need the consent of the governor. Why do they allow 5,000 hectares? It is to allow for movement within the ranch for the cattle and what have you.
Well,
that's all.
Mr. Raji, we're winding down now, but may I turn your attention to a scenario that played out and published on June 24 this year, wherein the SGF, Mr. Boss Mustafa, had attended this annual conference of Nigerian Institute of Estate Surveyors and Valuers in Abuja. And therein, he was quoted to have said, the federal government is reviewing the Land Use Act of 1978, and that they're going to take out the sections inhibiting economic development to ensure faster development.
Well, that's a welcome development. He does not say they will now create they will structure Land Use Act in a way as to support open grazing or to create routes. He didn't say that. He said to move economy. One of the ways they can move economy is to look at the provisions for consent under Section 22 of the Land Use Act, which many business interests have been complaining about. Perhaps that is what he has in mind. But until it unfolds or we see it, we are waiting.
On a final note,
Mr. Boss Mustafa is a very senior lawyer. Is an eminent administrator, and he understands business. And I think when he's talking to the estate people or estate valuers and whatever you, and he's talking about touching Land Use Act, he must have in mind what I've just said now, especially Section 22, which has been a naughty one, ranging from the case of Savannah Bank and Ajilo and what have you, all those kind of things. And people are complaining that it's mostly business. All this requirement of consent and consent and consent is Muslim business. And they want, why don't we rely on the rule of priorities in the land registry and all those kind? Maybe that's what it means, and not in terms of open grazing and what have you.
Okay, please give us an insight into this one before we let you go. So speaking of considerations that need to be made, people have said the cultural perspective should also be included, and they reference the lifestyle of majority of herders, saying they're not sedentary, they're migratory, as it were. And they also reference, desertification, overgrazing, which has reduced, the land available to graze and the rest. Do you think that consideration, especially the cultural one, which talks about moving from one place to the other, that's how it's been done for centuries, hence that's how it should be done? Do you think there's any consideration for that in law and in solving this problem?
Well, with time, people evolve. Society evolves. Nobody is more nomadic or was more nomadic than the Arabs. But today, when you go to the Arab countries, they don't move about. On the others here, I believe it's the fault of our government. If they have developed the society in a way and manner as to make movement unattractive, that won't be there again. For example, which of our leaders we want his or our child to be taking cattle from Nguru to Parakot? Which of them? Going through the bush. In the yesteryears, we used to go to Mecca, or they used to go to Mecca by road. But today, you cannot even talk of going to Mecca by land. I mean, by vehicle. They were trekking. They would trek. But such is no longer fashionable. So, nobody is born to remain nomadic. Most of the officers today, they were at one time or the other nomads. But today, will their children be nomads? So something should be done to change the lifestyle of these people, to make it unattractive for them to remain nomadic, to be in a place and do their work, have access to good things of life, and then in a just society where everybody will have equal opportunity. Why do you allow people to go into the bush and being exposed to dangers of snakes, scorpions, wild animals? I believe the government is failing in its duty to protect these herders. And when you allow people to undergo this, they become hardened. And when they become hardened, they can do anything. So the society owes it a duty to make sure that nomadic life does not continue. This is my take.
All right then, Mr. Ahmed Raji, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, thank you very much indeed for your perspectives this morning.
Thank you.
Well, back in a moment. Stay with us.